Welcome to MOOC's course on NGOs and Sustainable Development. And today's topic is Man and Environment, Reflections on Deep Ecology. Deep ecology is a philosophical system, or rather a philosophical approach towards environment and our ecosystem. We'll see what it is. Here you have a picture. This is Delhi, India's capital, and on the left hand side you will see Delhi under clear weather. On the right hand side, what blurs our vision is the pollution, air pollution. And there are certain facts. Let's start with certain facts. Air pollution in India is the 5th largest killer, and it's estimated to kill about 2 million people every year. So such a shocking news. And here is what the WHO, World Health Organization data says. It shows that almost all of the global population, 99%, breathe air that exceeds WHO guidelines limits and contains high levels of pollutants, with low and middle income countries suffering from the highest exposures. And today, 771 million people, 1 in 10, lack access to safe water, and 1.7 billion people, which is 1 in 4, lack access to a toilet. This is from water.org. So these facts are really shocking. They reveal a lot of things about what is waiting for humanity or humankind. And we are definitely facing a kind of crisis which has got several dimensions. We have talked about pollution, air pollution, and there is a sort of biodiversity crisis. There are several factors, several aspects to this crisis, or several factors that are responsible for this crisis. We'll identify some very important ones. Habitat destructions by humans for resources, for industrial and other developmental activities. We all know that we require a lot of resources for our developmental activities and for our requirements. A kind of activities which we are involved in will destruct the environment. Again, overutilization of natural resources for mass consumption, that includes over-harvesting plants for industrial agriculture and overfishing. Some of these practices, which we have been adopting for several years now, have already impacted the environment in an adverse manner. And chemical pollution is another factor that results in the collapse of insect population. And this insect population, we all know, are very important. They are critical for most of the ecosystem services on which we depend. So the more we destroy the biodiversity, the diverse life forms around us, we are actually destroying our own future. Again, climate change. As a result of several factors, we are today facing a climate crisis. Climate change is an ascending factor that is worsening the effects of all these drivers. As the planet warms, habitats become inhospitable. This is taken from Earth Justice. And now let's focus a little more on biodiversity. Nearly 40% of all species will face extinction by the end of this century. This is another shocking news. This is what scientists anticipate. Nearly 40% of all species are going to face extinction by the end of this century, and their disappearance will upend ecosystems and destabilize human civilization. There is no doubt about it, because we have come to the realization that human life is dependent. It is intimately dependent on the life forms, on other life forms, not just other human beings, but also to the environment, to the ecosystem, to the living and non-living entities in this world. So in that way, we have already impacted the planet in a very dangerous manner. Again, failing to protect all species is a planetary injustice, in addition to being potentially lethal. So this is what Earth Justice has to tell us. To protect all species is a part of planetary justice. We have the responsibility to do that. And now there are certain other aspects to this crisis. I am not referring to all of them, I am selecting only very few of them which we have already started facing. Coastal zone crisis, sea levels are rising in almost all parts of the world, sea levels are rising, and scientists expect that, or they anticipate that, by the end of this century many cities which are in the coastal area will disappear, will get submerged under the sea. Sea level rise is a major threat along with climate change and natural events such as tsunamis and landslides, and there are many other things that happen. Again, hazardous chemicals and waste are creating a lot of issues. Population explosion is another major problem which we encounter today, which leads to the shortage of food and other resources, overexploitation of natural resources, and all these things might cause severe ecological imbalances. Experts are afraid that there will be war for resources. Such wars have already started, already began, but they are going to intensify in near future. And what is the solution? So, when we look at the solution, the crisis poses serious threat to human survival. There is no doubt about it. Our own survival, the survival of humankind in this planet is under great threat. Again, how do we resolve this crisis is a practical issue for us, which is right now we have to address. And the environmental crisis is like a disease. So, let us try to understand this crisis. In more simple terms, we can compare it with a disease which we face, a problem with our health. That is, and what is the result? I mean, what is a disease? Most of the diseases are caused as a result of our lifestyle, the kind of lifestyle we have adopted. We call them occupational disease. Most of the diseases have become occupational diseases now, and lifestyle diseases like, for example, diabetes. And India has become the diabetes capital of the world, some people say. I do not know whether it is absolutely real, but it is true that it is a serious issue. So, there are several serious diseases which we humanity encounter, and how do we deal with these diseases? Definitely it is true that our medical sciences are day by day advancing with new medicines, new medical technologies and all that. But in spite of all such developments, the present day medicine is incapable of tackling many health issues. More than 2-3 years, nearly about 3 years, the kind of pandemic had made our life come to a standstill. So, what we are actually doing is that we are trying to cure our diseases with medication, but without changing the lifestyle that is the actual cause of this disease. So, we are really not worried about the causes. If you really know the cause, you just try to remove that cause so that the effect will also get removed. That is a simple logical truth, but we have no time for that. We do not take any effort in that direction, but rather we try to sort of directly tackle the disease, or rather the symptoms of the disease. And similarly, to control pollution, for example, let us take a comparison here. What we do is that we complain a lot about industrial pollution in today's world. Pollution is caused by industrial houses which employ technologies. So, what they do is that we are adopting, or we are coming up with pollution control technologies. So, the kind of problems which are created by one set of technologies are to be tackled with another set of technologies. So, we are sort of trying to find out technological solutions for our problems. Here is where probably we are mistaken. We hardly see the root cause of any of these issues, the root cause of pollution, as we fail to see the root cause of our diseases. We try to, reform the system. This is what we exactly do. By adopting a pollution control technology, what we are trying to do is that, we are trying to reform it. We are trying to reform the system, and in that course of time, we fail to recognize the fundamental problems with its basic assumptions and approaches. So, there are something which is fundamentally wrong about our entire lifestyle, our ways we are related to the environment, the ways we are related to living and non-living creatures in this world. We try to treat the symptoms. This is what I just mentioned. Instead of addressing the cause of the disease, we are trying to treat the diseases, and here the disease is pollution. The symptoms are pollution and resource degradation. So we think that these have to be addressed. So we are trying to locate new resources elsewhere, but that's not the actual solution. That's not going to resolve our issues. Hardly we find any problem with our basic assumptions, such as technological optimism. What is meant by technological optimism? Technological optimism is a view which says that, or which believes that, many of human problems we can find solutions with the help of technology. We forget the fact that most of these problems are created by technologies. But even if we know that, we think that we can find a solution, we can overcome them by means of adopting new technologies. Again, there is a firm belief in economic growth and scientific management. So this kind of an optimism, this is called techno-optimism, or a kind of being optimistic about scientific future. We forget that there is a limit to this, and we fail to address the more substantial issues like the philosophical, social and political root of the eco-cultural crisis. So we are actually encountering a crisis here, a crisis in our culture, a crisis in our ecosystem, a crisis in our life practices. And in order to address this crisis, we need to adopt a very broad framework. Multiple methods, multiple insights from different disciplines have to be brought in. So we need a philosophy of it, we need a social and political roots have to be found out. See, what is the root of the cause? As far as the disease is concerned, we said that it's a lifestyle, and we need to change our lifestyle, and it's pretty same here as well. We need to change our lifestyle, we need to change our life philosophy, the way we relate ourselves with the world, with other people, with and with different living and non-living creatures in this world, and all that. Our attitude towards food, environment, other people, other creatures and society as a whole needs to be evaluated and, if required, changed. It's a philosophical change, a change of perspective rather than a technological solution. This is what I just mentioned. We are trying to arrive at technological solutions, but technological solutions may not be available always. So here the solution for the ecological crisis probably is not a technological solution. It consists in adopting a deep ecological perspective, which is actually a philosophical perspective, which is a very organic, which is a very broad, holistic perspective. So we need to adopt that and shape our lives accordingly. Only then we would be able to find an appropriate solution to this problem, because we are not trying to find a solution for a simple issue, but it's an extremely complex situation. It's an extremely complex scenario that presents to us right in front of us in the form of a crisis, which raises serious threats to our survival even. And here what is required is not just reformation of our practices. Reformation of our practices means we essentially keep doing the same thing, but we only do things slightly differently. That's not enough. We have to actually change the entire life philosophy, entire attitude towards life. Our perspectives have to be changed. So it's not just a reformation of our practices where we remain the same, but a total transformation of our very being is required. So that is why I call it's a change in our philosophical attitudes rather than a scientific change. A change in our philosophical attitude is required here, and it begins with the man-environment relationship. So when we explore to find out a clear solution to this problem, so probably we need to have a clear understanding about the relationship between man and environment. So in what way man is related to environment? So traditionally, what happens is that we have an assumption that man, the very expression, the very phrase that man and environment suggests that man is different from environment. So, we are here above the environment and the rest, man and the rest of the world. So, we are actually starting with a fundamental dichotomy here, and this dichotomy is extremely problematic. That is what deep ecological perspectives are trying to tell us. This dichotomy is problematic, and this is the man, this is the philosopher who initiated this movement called deep ecology. His name is Arne Næss. He is a Norwegian philosopher, and he is a multifaceted personality, no doubt about it. He was heavily influenced by different traditions of philosophy, not only Western philosophy, but also different traditions. Like, for instance, he was from the Western philosophical tradition, he was deeply influenced by the philosophy of Benedictus Spinoza, who is a modern philosopher who talked about pantheism, who believed that everything in this world is constitutive, they are all aspects of one substance. His philosophy is called pantheism. He believed that nature is not different from God, and God is not different from nature. So, there is a kind of identification of nature with God, substance, one single substance. So, everything is a manifestation of that substance. So, a kind of unitary view from the very outset is propagated by Benedictus Spinoza, and then he was influenced by Buddhism and also the Upanishadic philosophies of India, because these are philosophical frameworks which again emphasizes on unity of everything. Okay. And then he was another major influence on his philosophical thinking and his perspectives is Gandhiji. So, he has on several occasions he has acknowledged his indebtedness to these different traditions. Now, his question is how we through our experiences perceive the world's relation to ourselves, and the basic features of the condition of people. See, how do we perceive through our experiences, how do we perceive the world and its relation to ourselves? That is very important here. When we talk about our relationship with nature, with the world, one way to relate with the world is the scientific way. The scientist does it by creating certain abstract structures and theoretical frameworks. The scientist also tries to understand the world, but that is not the kind of understanding that is required as far as ecological knowledge is concerned or ecological wisdom is concerned. We need a deeper kind of approach, and here he emphasizes on our experiences. How do we relate, perceive it? The purpose is not to arrive at definite answers. See, that is where it is fundamentally different from the approach of science. In science, the scientist is trying to arrive at definite answers to certain questions, but here it is not to find precise answers to questions, but to help us understand what we believe in from our innermost perspective, expand this perspective continually and facilitate communication so that we might contribute toward improving the state of affairs of the world. So, this is what Arne Næss says. He emphasizes on what we believe in from our innermost perspective rather than our intellectual frameworks which we later on adopt, probably artificially adopt. It is our direct experience of nature that is emphasized. So, that is one reason why Arne Næss gives a lot of importance for traveling, particularly mountaineering. He urges all of us to go to nature, go to the forest and experience the serenity of being with nature. Again, his philosophy is a very peculiar approach towards man-nature separation. He says that this separation which I just mentioned, man here and nature over and against man, this separation is fundamentally problematic for him, because all of us know that human life is an evolved form of life, because life is continually evolving in nature, and probably human beings are the most evolved, which is actually not correct. Evolution is a process, it is a continuous process, and the whole history of evolution, all story of evolution does not say man's story. There are many things which are evolving. Okay, evolution is not just human evolution, but a co-evolutionary process. Everything around us is in a process of evolution along with us. So they are all contributing to our own evolution. So it's not that, human beings are evolving in isolation with nature. Not in that way. Rather, the entire nature is evolving along with us. So it's actually a co-evolutionary process, and all life in that sense, if you try to understand this, if you try to understand that man is also an integral part of this process, or everything else, all forms of life, all animate and inanimate entities are part of this entire saga of life, then we will understand that all life has value in itself, independent of its usefulness to humans. See, generally there is a tendency among humans to evaluate things on the basis of its usefulness. What is it useful for? If it is going to be extremely useful for us, then it is valuable. We consider it as valuable. So some sort of a market value, he opposes this idea. Then again, engagements with a relational reality. So we need to basically understand our reality as a relational reality in which there is no subject and object, there is no substance and property, so that those fundamental distinctions like universal and particular, fact and value, such dualities are cancelled, or they have to be sublated, they have to be overcome. So this is what he emphasizes, and reality, according to Nace, is a dynamic, multi-layered manifold of hierarchically related gestalts to which we are always a part of. So there are different forms of life, rather innumerable forms of life around us, and they are all interrelated in very important ways. If you really try to understand what is the kind of view of reality that we can arrive at from these assumptions, these presuppositions, we come across a view that there is nothing called an extrinsically connected discrete objects or things in themselves. Things in themselves is actually a Kantian term, where Kant, the German philosopher, assumed that ultimate reality is something which we cannot experience, which is there but we cannot experience, something which is so unconnected from us. But Nace is not prepared to accept this view of reality. According to him, reality is something which we can know, which we can experience, and we are also part of that. We are not external to that. So it's not extrinsic. And again, he rejects the passive subject, which is the classical epistemological subject, where there is a subject and the rest of the world is an object. So that view is rejected here. So we are not mere passive subjects, and all living beings constitute one interconnected reality. So there is a kind of essential interconnectedness among diverse entities in this world. So they constitute a web, a complex web, where if one is affected, if one form of life is affected, it affects the entire web. Okay. So sometimes we may not be conscious of this, the way in which it is affected. It might take a little longer time for us to get the impact of it, but there is an impact. And living beings include not just so-called living beings as we understand. Okay, it includes individual organisms as well as ecosystems, rivers, mountains, and possibly earth. So this is a broadest, this is a kind of perspective which Nace was trying to advocate. So we could see that parallels in the ancient Indian wisdom here, the Buddhist and the Upanishadic wisdom here, where everything, rivers and mountains and everything in this world are conceived to be having life, and the whole ecosystem. And it's called Nace's gesture ontology, where living organisms have different levels of access to reality, of course, because they are different. One species is definitely different from other species. So we have to recognize the differences. At the same time, we should know that they all constitute a single web. But at the same time, let's emphasize that they are different because they have different levels of access to reality. They are unique. and based on their capacities and experiences and background, they will be relating themselves to reality in different ways. And there is no creature that has a privileged view of reality. We might be thinking that, okay, we humans with our power of reason, as we have a privileged access to reality, which is not, which is completely rejected by Arrhenius and other deep ecologists. The abstract structures of science which human rationality applies to understand the world, he says that they fail to access its concrete contents. There are diverse aspects, there are infinite aspects rather, as to put it, to use the language of Spinoza. And every organism and being with its uniqueness and peculiarities are interrelated and constitute a complex organic whole. So, we are addressing this organic whole. When we try to address reality, we are actually addressing this organic whole. If you try to sort of summarize our view about reality, where man comes, other organism comes, and the entire reality comes, we come to the conclusion that all are knots in a biospherical web. There is a complex web in which there are multiple nodes. Each organism is part of that node. This is basically a rejection of the anthropocentric view of reality. What is the anthropocentric view of reality? Anthropocentrism makes man at the center of the world. So, reality as seen from the perspective of man is anthropos. And what does it indicate? Like the problem with anthropocentrism is that then there is a possibility that we might, or rather a tendency that we might evaluate things on the basis of their utility for us, which is an extremely dangerous proposition. And men are actually citizen of the biotic community. See, this is another term which he introduces. There is a biotic community. Biotic means, life, something to do with life. So, we all contribute to the sustenance of life in essential ways, and we are all part of that biotic community with unique powers, and of course, our unique powers will also give us special responsibilities. Since we are capable of rational thinking, we have certain responsibilities as well. And each organism sees reality uniquely and distinctively, and no perspective is privileged or more real. I have already mentioned this. No organism, including humans, can claim a privileged view or access to reality. Humans may confuse their views to be correctly representing reality, which actually is a misconception, because our view is never a complete view. We are also like other creatures. Other creatures have very incomplete views, we all know that, but as far as we are concerned, we think that we have a more complete picture of reality, which is actually not correct. We keep improving our views, no doubt. Biological and cultural diversity have to flourish so that we can find probably a solution to the problem, the kind of ecological crisis which we are encountering, the kind of biodiversity crisis which we are encountering. The impact of human activities are the cause of this. The impact on other organisms and the impact on nature, on environment or our ecosystems. This has ultimately led to a kind of crisis. And it was human activities that impacted, that caused this crisis. So, we have to sort of reduce that impact and then completely overcome it. So, the basic ideological, so here what Nace does is, he is emphasizing the totality of life in which man is engaged in. The basic ideological, political, economic and technological structures are responsible for this impact. So, it is not just, we cannot change it overnight, we need to initiate a kind of total perspectival change, so that our ideological, our political, our economic and technological structures have to sort of rethought. I mean, a kind of very serious rethinking about how do we employ them in order to in our relationships with the world. Hence, they must also change. Nace talks about a wide identification with all forms of life and here we expand the scope of identification with all forms of life, not just with our immediate people and things, but rather we are trying to expand it one by one and finally reach the entire biotic reality. The aim of life, according to him, is self-realization. Here comes a kind of a conclusion, a kind of a logical conclusion to his philosophical view. The aim of human life is self-realization that consists in wider and wider identifications. So, the more wider, the more broader we realize our identities are, the better is our self-realization. And here, as I mentioned, the wisdom of Buddhism, Spinoza's pantheism, Upanishadic philosophy and Gandhiji's critique of the industrialized civilizations are employed. Gandhiji's book, which was written in 1909, Hind Swaraj, which is arguably one of his first books, which was written by Gandhiji before his arrival to India from South Africa. It was on a journey from South Africa to London. He writes this book, and in which he lashes out criticism against industrialized civilization of the West, which is rooted in a conception of progress, human progress and development, which is extremely techno-optimistic, which believes that everything else in this world are for human happiness, and which employs a kind of instrumentalist perspective towards everything in this world. So, Gandhiji's book, it is a very small book, but it lashes out a severe criticism against industrialized civilization. And Gandhiji here brings out a concept called Swaraj, and Swaraj probably is a kind of philosophical perspective which deep ecology was trying to advocate. And we will wind up here. This is not just a kind of a perspective on environment, or it is not just simply an environmental philosophy here, but rather deep ecology is a philosophy of life. This becomes, I would reiterate this point, that a kind of philosophical outlook like this becomes essential for our sustainable development. I thank you for all for your patient hearing.